to the April 20th meeting of the Utah Lake Commission Technical Committee. We have a brief agenda today. We'll spend the next hour and a half or so to kind of work through a couple items. Just briefly on the agenda, I'm going to share that on the screen, Sam.
Yes.
I'll just walk through our plan for this morning, and then we'll roll into a round of introductions. So start first with the introductions and then go into review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting on January 6th. And we'll have a presentation from Jeff Ostermiller with the Division of Water Quality. He's here in the room with us. Kind of talk about the division's plan for algal remediation, algal treatments for this coming summer. We'll have a 10-minute presentation from Soren Simonson, the Executive Director of the Jordan River Commission, on Love Your Watershed. Eric will walk us through the Utah Lake Authority and the plan for transitioning from the commission to the authority. We'll have an executive director's report, typical project updates, lake levels, marinas, those kinds of things. Sam will walk us through a staff report and then the public comment. So with that, good morning. I'm Scott Daly. I'm with the Division of Water Quality. I'm the chair of the technical committee. And I think we'll just walk through the room here, have folks introduce themselves, their affiliation, and who you represent on the TC, or if you're a member of the public, and then we'll go to Zoom. We'll just start over with Josh.
Josh Holden, Park Manager, Utah Lake State Park.
Todd Munger, Sustainability Director of ESC.
Soul Vineyard City, with water.
Justine Marshall, Vineyard City. I oversee stormwater and flow management. I'm Olivia. I'm the new intern.
I'm Sam Brager, Outreach Coordinator for the Utah Lake Commission. Eric Ellis with Utah Lake Commission.
Anna Bonner, Division of Water Quality.
Trent Anderson, staff engineer for Lincoln City. Jeff Tim Blaker, Jacobson Community.
Russ Benson with Century to Water and June Sucker.
Thank you.
Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
Scott Burr with Utah County.
And before we move to online, I just want to Hannah's introduction. She's the new Division of Water Quality Harmful Algal Bloom Coordinator, managing health harmful algal bloom issues. So you probably get to know her from her work in Utah Lake. Moving online, I'll just go through the list that I have in front of me.
Carrie Malkovich is a council member with Woodland Hills. She happens to be driving right now, so requested not to be talking and driving at the same time.
Excellent, thank you. Jake Nostrom.
Yeah, I'm with Springville City, Stormwater and Wastewater.
Okay. Morgan Faulkner.
Hi, this is Morgan Faulkner with Forestry Fire and State Lands.
And Ren Lambert.
Yeah, this is Ren Lambert from Limnotech in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
That take care of everyone and besides everybody. Okay. Excellent. Thanks. Moving on, we'll go into our minutes approval. Any comments on the minutes from the January 6th meeting? Be aware of?
There's a couple of typos, but I did should put attention to those.
I would look for those for sure. Thanks.
No major, so I can tell you. Look at that.
Okay. Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve minutes from the technical committee meeting held on January 6th, 2022.
Second. Okay. Okay, so all in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Excellent. Well, let's move right into Jeff's presentation on algal remediation.
You guys turn it on.
You want me to go over there or where?
You should be good there. Give me just 1 second to get you all set up on the presentation mode.
Okay, so why am I here? I was asked last year by our director to assist Kate, who was the previous harm reduction coordinator, develop a monitoring strategy for doing some of these algal treatments that we've been doing for a couple of years now. Kate's left and just took over, so I'm responsible for developing some of the reports and that kind of thing. We do plan on continuing, as I'll discuss a little bit more, continuing treatments in the marinas around the lake, making some adjustments based on what we've learned previously with the data we've collected. And I want to keep your input on some of those changes that we're considering making, make sure we're moving in the right direction. I'll start with sort of going through what it is we found so far, and then we'll go into sort of future plans. And feel free to ask questions or engage. So we really started trying to get treatments going in some of the marinas around the lake in 2020. There were a variety of companies that were doing treatments around the lake in 2020. It was really challenging for us to coordinate that and coordinate data collection and coordinate state parks and everything else. So that was one of the early lessons learned. We did find that, you know, if you add algicides to water, you kill algae and cyanobacteria. And they worked. We did see significant drops in almost most of the cases. Unfortunately, those drops were kind of short-lived. So we would work for several days, maybe even a week or up to 10 days maybe, and then the algal blooms would bounce back to be about at levels previously. We did see some evidence that looked like we might be seeing a shift in composition. So as the cyanobacteria community rebounded, it looked like the dominant cyanobacteria taxa that were present seemed to change. As I'll show you later, we now think that with some more carefully controlled monitoring, that some of those changes may have just been a reflection of seasonal changes in cyanobacteria composition that were naturally occurring. But you know, with only 2 years worth of data, I hesitate making generalizations. I think the important thing is to keep monitoring the stuff so we're doing the right things in places where it's needed the most.
This was compared to the mainland,
Compared
to a degree.
we didn't have that information very well dialed in 2020. We did in 2021.
And there was a difference in the progression of taxa
Yeah.
in marinas versus elsewhere.
Yeah, and in 2021, I'll talk about in just a second here, we did have controls. So we did open water controls, and then we had our treatment sites within the marinas themselves. And we had a lot of replication of samples. It turns out, I don't think that was as helpful as we thought it would be, but we'll do that in a second. And so I'll make some modifications this year. But, so then in 2020, we decided we got some additional funding to continue the work for a year. Unfortunately, with the way our fiscal years work, it's not doesn't work on the same timeline as cyanobacteria. And so by the time we got the money, we had, you know, the RFP out and everything else, but we had to get contracts in place. We moved pretty quickly with all of that, but we weren't able to get out on the lake really extensively with the eutrophics who ended up getting the bid until probably later than we would have liked. We did have some funding that we were able to pick. ATS, who was currently on contract from the previous year, did some early work in the Linden Marina, which we monitored, and I'll show you some of the results of that in a second. And then eutrophics came on board, and once they started in July-ish, they ended up doing weekly treatments in all of the marinas, for 1 week throughout the rest of the season. There are 2 progress reports. I can send Scott these links where you can have this presentation. You can download and get some of the data. So when we decided to design this study, we took BACI before, after control of impact. It was a sample design. We decided we would take 3 replicates and the open waters, which we consider our controls, and then in the marinas, which are where we're doing the treatments. And then we did 2 habitats because we tend to treat our shoreline or beach samples differently than we do open water with respect to recreational use decisions and that kind of thing. And so we thought we'd look at those 2 habitats independently to see if we would notice differences. We didn't see in a second, so I don't think that may be necessary moving forward. We did a variety of water quality parameters, chlorophyll, taxonomic composition, salt oxygen, temperature, that sort of thing. Once Eutrophics came on board, I'll talk a bit more about this in detail in a second here, but they found these really inexpensive and pretty helpful, I think, buoys they could put out that measured a lot of these parameters real time and you could access that information throughout the season. We plan on potentially expanding that stuff moving forward. And so next steps. And then one of the things that we noticed the previous year is that these resurgences would happen. One of the hypotheses folks had was that that resurgence is largely from wind pushing the cyanobacteria that were in the open water back into the marinas, and then they would, cause them to come back here as opposed to cyanobacteria just starting to regrow within the marinas. And so we had a lot of discussions about how we could avoid that or mitigate that to some degree. And Eutrophics has some experience working with these bubble curtains that you can see in sort of the bottom corner here. And plan on again expanding some of this work. It's working pretty well. There's one that they established right on this point out here across the bay. It's not currently turned on, so it's right where that it's out over there. And so that divided the bay in half, and we're planning on using that as basically to conduct some experiments to evaluate just how effective the bubble curtains are in terms of preventing cyanobacteria from coming back in treatment. Our hope is that if we can get this to work, that we can have our treatments last longer, need fewer treatments, and keep the bays clearer for recreational uses throughout the year. So there were supply chain issues, as you may have all heard about, and it took a while to get the construction necessary to move the electricity there and get all the equipment necessary and that kind of thing. So we weren't able to get the bubble curtains actually installed, even though we were working on it most of the summer until late September, I think. And then we did one treatment in October to evaluate the effectiveness of the bubble curtains. We plan on doing more over the next couple of months here.
That go for right now? Okay,
Yeah. So another thing that we did in 2021, the industry standard for this has been in existence for a long time. We're using copper algicides that have some potential problems in terms of non-target effects, because copper is toxic, and particularly heavy metals can be toxic to fish. And there's some evidence that copper can accumulate over time, causing these kind of non-target effects to get worse over time. And so we wanted to experiment with trying to use some additional other types of products. So in this case, we required in the RFP that the treatments in Utah Lake be conducted using peroxide-based treatments. They are less likely to accumulate. There are fewer known non-target effects associated with peroxide, but they have to apply a lot more of the stuff on a per area basis. And because of that, it ends up being about twice as expensive to conduct this. But we want to, I guess I wanted to bring this up because we'll probably talk about this in some context, but there are lots of new technologies that are coming on board all the time because harmful algal blooms are becoming a bigger and bigger problem worldwide. And we want to make sure that as we move forward with an RFP, particularly a longer term RFP, we have the flexibility that people identify new treatments that are perhaps as effective maybe, but have less secondary or non-target kind of effects. But we have the flexibility to try to experiment with using some of those things to see if they work. I mean, overall, we're sort of saying if we take these first few years, like we're going to, I'll mention in a minute here, we're going to go out with an RFP pretty quick, like in the next couple of weeks, or 5 years worth of treatments. We're going to pull aside some of the funding that we have so that we have an ability to basically conduct adaptive management. Go look at the data each year, say, what have we learned? Are there new technologies on board that might be able to apply in the future? And where would we apply them? And the advantage of using marinas is you can use them at a smaller scale, test some of these things out, see what's most effective and where. So we want to make sure that some flexibility is there. Ultimately, we'll also so the first treatment, as I mentioned, was a Linda Marina. It was a copper-based treatment. It was as early as we could get out there, they had a bunch of, some big event planned, and there was bad blooms, and it was looking like it was gonna cause issues, so we wanted to get out there to try to help them out. Because they had a bunch of school kids coming out, and we wanted to make sure they were safe, or safe as they could be. And so we conducted this treatment, and ATS conducted the treatment in the marina. We collected data immediately prior to, 1 day after, and then 7 days after the treatment. And you can see the open water at the top, shoreline samples at the bottom. And in both cases, we have both treatments and controls. And so Marina would be the treatments. And so you can see that a couple of things. First, just focus on the open water, maybe the top left on the graph. So you see that the controls were a lot higher than the marinas were even before the treatment started. And we'll see that kind of carried through. And unfortunately, there were such profound differences that I wasn't really able to take advantage of the bottom kind of analysis plan that we thought about previously, because those differences were just so extreme. Any treatment differences were kind of just masked as a result of all of that statistic. So that was a good lesson learned. But you do see that 1 day after, we did see a significant drop in algal concentrations, and then it bounced back to actually levels that were slightly higher than they were prior to the treatment within 7 days. And you can see that the control actually was lower than it was in the 1 day sample as well. So there's something going on causing. So I guess I take from that the bounce back within the treatment area is actually probably even more profound, post-treatment effects, considering that the control was lower than it was immediately after too. And so it's probably hard to decouple that. But I think the reason I wanted to mention all that is one of our lessons learned last year, I think, is the importance of coupling whatever we're doing within the marinas with the control sample immediately outside of the marinas. It's impossible to interpret the data without that context. So continue that.
Sampling frequency this year.
Yes, we'll get to that. Okay. We're going to handle it a bit differently. Now I want to give you guys input on that too. So I'll try to go through these results. Let's get to so we got Marina at the top, we have the control at the bottom, and these are just open water samples. We didn't see major differences between those two habitats, so I'm just going to focus on the open water stuff. So the pre-treatment samples, so the day before, one of the things you'll notice is that in the open waters of the lake control samples, you had a very different composition. It was dominated by Banazzolinum, whereas within the marina, before the treatments even took place, it was dominated by the Lindro. I have the hardest time pronouncing Spermin. I don't know why, it's like always. And so, but then that shifted even in the controls, right? So you see at the bottom graph, 7 days after, the open water started to look a lot like the marina did before the treatments occurred. So there was this natural shift in composition that was occurring in the open waters of the lake at the same time we were doing this. And the previous year, when we didn't have those controls, and going back to the need for them, we were interpreting this shift in composition as maybe being associated with a treatment. And in reality, we think it was just a shift that was occurring lake-wide, and the marina was just a little ahead of the control samples, probably due to its more confined nature.
Is that in relation to
Yeah, I think it's probably a temperature effect. Yeah, and so we know that different taxa have different cyanobacteria taxa have different temperature. And we think that's a big reason for the shift that occurs seasonally, and we warmer probably with the marina. Probably what happens.
That's in line with the longer term taxonomic record for algae and cyanobacteria in the lake. Usually goes through the season succession for starting diatoms. First, cyanobacteria is typically seen in zona, and then as the season progresses, it's replaced with algaspermin and microcystis. Common ones that we see in various places in the lake. And it's different throughout the lake and depending on the cat type, marinas, Provo Bay versus Ocean Bay versus the other water. So that's in line, I think, with what we see in the longer term effort for the lake.
So there's been a secondary effects. I mentioned that at the beginning. One of the things we expected to see with the copper creek, like violate copper water quality standards. The previous year, we did see that. We were only exceeding our chronic portion of those criteria. Now, it was very short-lived. What we saw in this case was it was short-lived again. Within 7 days, it was well below the criteria again. But in this particular case, we actually saw for the first time an excursion over the acute criteria for copper. But again, that was only the day after, it went away after 7 days. We don't know what happened in between there, but it is something we should probably keep a close eye on moving forward and plan on doing a couple things to try to address that.
Is there a threshold for the day after? I thought it was a 4-day or something like that.
It's a 4-day average. You're right, but we tend to, ideally, you would get the day sample at 4 days, but we're kind of, in this case, we were permitting them to do this treatment kind of knowing that we were going to see an excursion. We have to add copper and high enough concentrations to kill the cyanobacteria, which we knew would cause at least a short-term excursion. We were hoping it would just be the chronic criteria that we exceeded for a short period of time. Anyway, when we interpret the criteria, we have some flexibility in terms of, you know, we don't always have the 4-day sample, so we just average what we have typically in here. It's the difference between criteria derived by torturing triggers in the laboratory, and you can have very careful control there. But when you're out in the real world, it's less so. But, and in this case, the logistics were such that, you know, the 4-day sample occurred on a Sunday, and we just couldn't get. And so this is a great graph that Eutrophics put together. I think kind of shows a succession from when they started working on this stuff or throughout the year. You know, starting in early June, you start to see some watches, maybe a couple of mornings in Provo Bay that were occurring, and then higher and higher concentrations throughout the year. By the second week of August, we were starting to do weekly treatments. One of the things you mentioned also, we'll talk about copper versus peroxide, is the label requirements of copper are such that you cannot do treatments more frequently than once every other week. And so when you're in this circumstance where, in this case, we were trying to play catch up, leads were already pretty developed, and we need to do weekly treatments. We ended up having to switch at the other marina between the copper treatments, peroxide treatments, copper treatments, peroxide treatments, which is a little challenging trying to interpret the data after the season, but at least, you know, we thought about that and we're prepared for it. And this graph actually shows just that. You can see where we're switching between algae to peroxide-based treatments on all the other marinas except for Utah Lake, where we just do peroxide throughout.
So I'm not a fish guy, but with the copper sulfate, were the levels high enough that there's any depth getting the fish or anything like that?
No one noted any fish kill, which is good news.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were out there a lot, so I could do the possibilities. And fish are pretty mobile, or better, but you know, if they get stressed, they'll move to where they're less stressed. They keep. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. What's the durability or the duration of how long it's going to last for the peroxide? Does it last any longer? Does it off gas and is it gone faster in the treatments? I mean, it's twice as expensive.
Yeah,
But you have to treat it more frequently or less frequently.
I don't know
if you could.
So here's the challenge. This is why we're planning on changing monitoring approaches this year in part, because we only have the funding to do this. We have the funding to do this more extensive monitoring for 3 different treatments. And then we included in Eutrophics contract, they were planning on doing, because they have people from around the country would fly in, and you just kind of work around the country. And so they would fly in, they would do the pre-treatment sample, so the prior sample, and they would do the day after sample. But then we would have a gap until they did the next treatment, which would then the previous one would be considered like the 7-day, maybe, previous one. But we plan on trying to fill those gaps a little bit better, and I hope that's one of the questions I hope we can get a better handle on this year, in addition to getting a better handle on the effectiveness of these bubble curtains, as we plan on doing, maybe putting them in more places. I think we're all so these are average responses. This is Nootropics data from their report. This just shows throughout all the treatments, on average, how effective they were pre-treatment and 1 week prior. And of course, this is masking a lot of variation. But I think the big take home is that in general, cyanobacteria counts on the y-axis and different marinas, and then by month on the x-axis. We're looking at, in general, we were successful in reducing algal concentrations at least over the short term when they fire. And they did this work too, which I thought was pretty cool. We took pictures before and after, pretty noticeable differences, I think, in many cases, at least immediately after the treatments. And we had some feedback from some of the parks that said they were noticing significant improvements. And then the bottom one is kind of cool. That's showing the cyanobacteria cells, and you can see that, you're still seeing some cells. So if you look at counts and cell counts, those data can be a little deceptive sometimes too, if you're not careful, because that cell still exists, but it's obviously dead or dying, and it just hasn't. So we would still probably count that in an analysis, even though it's not a viable cell, as opposed to the ones on the left, but actually pretty healthy. So it's just something to keep in mind as we're interpreting the data moving forward. And so once Nootropics came on board, we did this other experiment, very similar in American fork. And here you can see that similar stuff. The controls were maybe a little bit more comparable in the open water samples this time than they were previously, but there were still some considerable differences in composition. I'll show that in just a second. But again, we saw a drop immediately after. In this case, 7 days after, it didn't bounce back to pre-treatment levels. It still bounced back, but not as high as it was pre-treatment. So and given what you see in the controls there, where they're also still, they're as high as they were pretty much as pre-treatment. We think this is evidence that we're still seeing some lasting effects of the treatment, even at 7 days, although not maybe what we'd like to see. But so we'll want to try to extend that as we can. And this again, the same kind of thing as we saw the last time. Again, the marina, in this case, well, I guess pre-treatment wise, you can see something very similar that was occurring, where it was about, the Lindicospermum was about half of the taxa, the other half were Planktothrix. And then 1 day after, in both the marina, the controls, and the treatments, you can see that the shift is occurring. So there's a shift again occurring lake-wide, but it occurred regardless of the treatments too. So I think that what we're seeing when we're seeing the shift in composition, at least so far, is maybe not related to the treatments, which is good. Because one of the concerns we had the previous year is we saw some taxa that were a shift to taxa that produced more cyanotoxins, or at least more potentially harmful cyanotoxins, so neurotoxins and that kind of thing. And we were seeing a shift in composition that was going to cause cyanobacteria that were potentially a greater threat to recreational uses, as when the bounce back occurred, that would obviously be a concern. I don't think that was true. And in this case, this was also a copper treatment. But we saw excursions of in the open water, at least, of the chronic, not the acute concentration. So we think that we were getting the dosing right, I guess. Oh, and I forgot to mention on the last slide, in no cases did we see cyanotoxin concentrations increase following treatments. That was another non-target effect we were concerned about, because often one of the things that causes cyanobacteria to produce cyanotoxins is stress. And a lot of times when they die, their cells slice and they're releasing the toxins into the water column. We wanted to make sure that we weren't seeing that as a result of the treatments, and we didn't see that so far, but something we'll continue to follow. This is the one example of what we had for the bubble curtains. We had 3 treatments, 1 day, 4 days, and then 6 days following the treatment. And you see that the controls are dropping off. It's the default, we're moving away from cyanobacteria, being the dominant taxa on the lake. But you do see that, the treatments are all the control. So in this case, the control is the other side of the marina on the outside of the bubble. So it's within the same bay. And then the treatments where we were conducting, where the bubble curtains were operational. And you can see that the bubble curtains seem to be working. It seems like they were able to prevent this mixing from occurring, and that was encouraging. And we plan on continuing that work later.
Did you treat your control area in that case?
We didn't in that case.
You did not?
Did not, yeah. And so that's actually something we can talk about, because I actually have a slide that talks about that too. So there's some trade-offs there. So these are the algal trackers I was talking about. It's a company in Colorado. I wish I thought of this idea myself. They take the sort of the printer model in terms of their business model. It's really cheap to buy the buoys and a lot more expensive to run them. So you're buying your printer cartridges. So they only cost about $800 to purchase these things, and they do phycocyanin, so and chlorophyll, turbidity, water temperature, a bunch of weather characteristics, sunlight, solar radiation, wind, rain, that kind of thing. So, and they do it real time. You can access it to cell signal. They're solar powered, so you can actually track what's happening in any of our bays. Or if they were out in the open water as controlled, you could see what's happening in real time. They have an idea that ultimately, if we're going to be doing Trophics has done this in other areas where they've actually installed infrastructure with diffusers, and they could actually, and ultimately, we knew we were going to be, say, treating Utah Lake Marina on a regular basis. It's going to be, over the next 5 years or whatever. We could potentially install something that would allow us to, from a cell phone, maybe, we're seeing things picked up, actually treat and get it before they start to really remit. So that's future work that we can consider. But you see, so it's $800 to purchase. It's $2,000 a year for this data service, which is pretty slick. You can download it. It's a bit of real time. Not too unreasonable, I don't think. It includes all the cell service and everything else. And the other cool thing about these, one of the problems we have on Utah Lake with our buoys is trying to keep the equipment clean and operational, because there's a lot of growth that occurs on the lake. But these guys, at least once a year, if you pay them $400, you send in your buoy and they make sure everything is working. If you need to replace a sensor, they'll just replace it for you and they send it back and it's working as good as if it's new. So, it costs half as much as the purchase to begin with, but it also would save us a lot of heartache on our end in terms of trying to maintain. So, I think there's a lot of potential here to really take advantage of some of this stuff. Pardon me? This year? I think we're going to have one. We'll talk about this in just a second here, but I think we're going to have one treatment and one control, one in the marina and one outside the marina, for all the marinas with which we're conducting treatments this year. So I think this is pretty useful information, and then we can give you guys a login to this stuff and start doing it this year and follow it ourselves. And I think, so $2,400 a year to have per buoy, so $5,000 per marina. When you're talking about a treatment, the product you need to do one single treatment is more than that, right? So having these kind of data available to you for the much less than what it costs you just for the product to do a single treatment, at a given probably. But again, I won't spend all the time here, so we want to do stuff. But we have this issue with these resurgences happening. We think now it's largely caused by the lake. Bubble curves, I think, are encouraging. We did see some rebounding for almost all of our treatments. We had a really hard time trying to do treatment effects lasting 7 days and many days. A few, like showed previously seen with a little bit. Here's the money, here's what we're talking about in terms of money. So we had $436,000 basically was the budget for last year, and that includes, by the way, up until July 1 of this year. So we're going to be doing some stuff starting in early June, second. But I think they did a pretty good job, or we effectively did a good job of putting the money in the right place. Most of the money we spent was actually spent on the treatments themselves. We had put $60,000 into monitoring this stuff, again, is important. And then 24,000 put in infrastructure and the quality and bulk. Permitting was negligible costs. And then, so we still have some money left over. We have about $106,000. So the plan right now is on start on June 13th, and we'll be doing the peroxide treatment in Utah Lake State Park, and then all of the other areas around Lake Olive and as well. We decided that we're going to continue the treatments on, which is the next topic of discussion. And that's about when the blooms really, you go think back to that graph I just showed a minute ago. Early June is where we start to see the bloom really starting to happen. And then we do one more treatment before this contract expires on June 27th, which is right before July 4th weekend. It's also right before the contract ends. And hopefully, we're planning on putting some of this money, as we'll talk about in a second, towards bubble curtain installation into Linden Marina. And whether we can get that done by July 1 will depend a lot on how we contractor availability, how we're getting power there, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll try. That's our goal. Hopefully. And so this is a kind of a budget, give you guys a sense of what this is costing. So one of the things that we learned last year is that they think in their eutrophic experience of doing this kind of stuff in other lakes is that if you get on top of this before the blooms start happening, it's easier to keep them under control. We were kind of playing catch up last year. They were already happening the blooms are pretty extensive before we even started a regular treatment process, but you can see that the, so in this case, this is Utah Lake State Park, treat it with the peroxide based stuff. The product itself needs 6,000 pounds of it, and it costs about $8,000 to buy that much product, and then it takes longer to apply it because it takes longer to apply the product. It's about $6,000, so roughly about $19,000 for treatment for the application. And then in this case, we were thinking about $5,000–6,000 for monitoring expenses. And then we'd have the algae trackers again. In this case, what we're talking about, is that a pointer on it?
Is it not clicking again for you?
No, I was pointing at a pointer.
It does, the green. Should be a green line on there.
Hopefully. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
So we're going to put a buoy out here, and this part of it, the bubble curtains are here, right? And the idea right now, at least, would be, at least for these first couple of treatments, is to treat in this area here and not to treat this, so we can evaluate, whether there's whether the bubble curtains are being affected. Unfortunately, of course, these are the beaches where people like to recreate, and there's some on this side too, but our main objective being to try to protect people with primary contact recreation doesn't work as well. And so we're kind of struggling right now with, kind of the trade-offs between evaluating the bubble curtains throughout the summer, as opposed to treating the whole area so that we can capture this area as well. We'll still keep the bubble curtains in. I mean, ideally we would have put them here, but getting power there was challenging. But maybe if we can demonstrate that they're effective, there might be enough incentive to, tell me, but they to run to try to figure out a way to get power out there so we can put them really where they should be, just out here.
Why? Help me understand why you wouldn't treat in the outer marina too to actually demonstrate the effectiveness of the bubble curtain. Because if you're not treating the outside of it, then you're doubling up your work inside the bubble curtain. It's both treatment and bubble curtain that could be proven to be effective outside. You know, all you're proving is that.
Good point. Well, I think that what we were trying to do is kind of emulate what we may have been seeing in the waters of the lake where we aren't treating it at all. We're seeing the excursion coming in. But I think we could do it. I think for these first couple, maybe doing it that way earlier on. I don't know. I'm totally open for ideas. I go back and forth on this myself too. And I think ideally we want to protect those beaches where people are recreating to the extent that we can, but the scientists didn't know. So,
Because if you treated the outer and you treated the inner, one would be a control of lake open water mixing.
Yeah.
And the other would be a control
Yeah.
of bubble curtain and treatment. So you get three
Yeah.
stages.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. But yeah, none of this is, we have a couple of weeks still. And by the way, there's a sample analysis plan I put together for last year that describes the monitoring in detail. I'm revising it right now to reflect all these kind of changes, and we wanted to get input from others to really put the paper on this stuff too. So that's helpful. So Linden Marina, I think, is an ideal place to put a bubble curtain because there's a lot of primary contact recreation there. There's a lot of events, and there's an ideal place. There's an ideal place with which to put them. And there's a nice constricted channel here. We've actually put the proposal right now would be to put 2 of them. So you have a double kind of barrier. If you have to run power from here all the way out to here in order to get them operational. So we made the actual cost of the curtains themselves relatively trivial considering that. So buying 2 of them would be $10,000. Running the power lines and everything else out there, that's maybe be about $21,000. But I think this would be a really cool, great place to test some of this stuff. And it's also a high recreation. So we're going to try to get that done again this year. I think we have enough money in the budget to be able to do that.
With Linden Marina, where it's kind of a privately run marina, you contacted the owner, has he seen enough increase or betterment? Would you like the investment in donating, supplementing some of the costs?
I have not asked him whether he would cost wise. I don't think.
I mean,
he's very excited about
it's
the work
being
we're
done for
doing.
free everywhere else.
Yeah,
But
it's
at a
kind
minimum,
of,
the power. So
Pardon?
at a minimum, have them cover power.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we should be in conversation with them about improving where they can. So moving forward, there was that, how much was it? 30 million allocated towards, most of that money is going to go to non-point source projects and that sort of thing. But we're planning on putting some of this into this ongoing treatment and stuff. About $500,000 a year is what we're thinking now. That would include, again, the ability to be flexible, looking at other treatments. We're going to develop a yearly monitoring and treatment strategy so that we aren't just doing the same thing all the time. It's a little bit more challenging to write an RFP that way, but we're trying to include a lot of that flexibility. And so that RFP should be out. Again, we're shooting for the next couple of weeks. So we can try to have it wrapped up so we don't have a gap in the treatments this year. One of the things that's come up as we've been thinking about this though, and I wanted to get you all's input here, is that we've been doing this at all marinas because we didn't know where else and then why we didn't have a reason to not, right? But as we've been out there and we've been paying careful attention to things, there are a couple that's really obvious that we have a lot of primary contact recreation. So what that reflects the risk of harmful people's health. So Linden Marina is a good example. There's lots of beach area there, lots of people swimming and canoeing, whatever else. Utah Lake is another great example. There's really good infrastructure here to support primary contact recreation. And I had this arrow here to discuss what we just talked about a second ago, which was some of the trade-offs where we do the treatments. There are other marinas where it's not clear to me that even if we can be effective at treating the algal within the marina, there's not really any primary contact or recreation that occurs within the marina, at least when we've contacted them to ask them about this, operators. I think the best example is American Fork, where they have this beach right here. That's where everyone goes with their paddle boards and does all their stuff. That's in the open water of the lake. And then we could go ahead and treat it here. And even hard, there's steep embankments that go down. It's hard to even, it would be hard to conduct primary contact recreation, even if you wanted to. And so
Your Saratoga one's gonna have a protected bay by the end of the year.
The northern circle on your Saratoga Marina.
it's going to be protected.
By the end of the year, they'll have the third jetty on the north end.
Okay.
They're estimated.
And it'll be an enhanced beach, so that'll be an ideal one to have a bubble curtain and some treatments taking place.
That is good to know.
Can they put in power infrastructure
Yeah.
as they do the construction?
That was what the cost was.
I don't know that it is, but I have a meeting with their consultant today and I'll suggest that they run, it's not heavy power. What kind of power is required for the bubble curtain?
I don't think it's a pumping.
Regular
air.
outlet.
They just run a compressor, correct?
Yeah, it's like, and then they have a diffuser that goes along the bottom. So
Is it is the linear diffuser or the circular? I mean, I've
The
got
little
two
diffusers that are like,
Yeah,
so they don't clog up, they're connected by an air thing.
I have two and they just run off 120, but I don't know.
I think it's 120.
Sarah with Saratoga, what's the power for again?
For a bubble curtain that would protect it, by putting bubbles across the inlet of your marina,
Yeah.
it acts as a barrier for algae that wants to come in as water interchanges with the main body of the lake.
Okay, a bubble what? Sorry.
Curtain.
Curtain, bubble curtain. Oh, okay. I'm making, we're working on that park plan, so I can include that comment in there too.
Great, perfect.
One, I don't want to, it's too far off topic, but we have discussed, the physical orientation of the jetties.
Right.
As a means to be able to maybe capture lake water and push more lake water into the marinas, which could exacerbate harmful conditions in them. I don't know where Saratoga is at in terms of planning, but is there an opportunity to maybe address the physical design or physical shape of them?
Yeah, there were
Any of those.
I know that their consultant is very aware of.
If you go to the marina right now, there's a giant pile of rocks. They're building that jetty as we speak. That third jetty is under construction and the whole beach is piled with massive rocks right now. So I think the design has already been decided.
Okay, an existing jetty on that.
Yeah.
East
Well,
corner.
that's a really great opportunity, I think. Our plan was right now, we were thinking of not doing treatments in American Fork this year due to what I was just talking about. Most people point out things that we aren't thinking about. We did talk to them and they agreed that there wasn't a lot of primary contact in there. But again, if that's what we're trying to protect is those most sensitive uses, we think we're better off putting our money elsewhere. And we were considering doing the same thing in Saratoga. Maybe that makes sense this year, but we should definitely plan on next year at least treating in this new swimming area that we're building. And if we had a bubble curtain there, that would be a great test. But I think in the future, there's actually one of the things we want to test in the future, like in another year, is they do make bubble curtains that you can put out, that was consider doing something like that and protecting that beach instead of trying to do the marina. It's going to be still more exposed to the waves, and I'm not sure how effective, given Utah Lake and the wave winds develop here, how effective bubble curtains would be. They have done that kind of thing in other lakes, and Tropics has worked on this stuff, and it has been effective, but our conditions are different here. But it would be worth testing whether or not we can get that to work. And it sounds like Saratoga Springs could be an excellent way to test that in kind of a more ideal circumstances. So we'll definitely plan on setting aside some money to be able to do that next year. So that's good to know.
And Scott, you said you're going to be talking with Lars or with someone else.
I will, yes.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Ken was another one we're kind of on the fence about. They get some of the more toxic, some higher levels of cyanotoxin concentration often occur at this marina. So in that sense, we may want to continue conducting these treatments there. They also get a different composition of cyanobacteria and taxa. I wasn't sure actually in this case whether people are actually recreating here. I know people do lot of recreation out in this area, I've seen, but you guys know more than I do, so I wanted to get your feedback on too. Right, as it is right now, we're planning on continuing to do this in East Grand. But
If it had a bubble curtain and had treatments, I bet people would use it. It's that it's so, it gets pretty sketchy looking in that harbor. It's one of the best examples for what a harmful algal bloom looks like. You go there to take a picture.
Yeah.
And so if it were looking really nice, I bet people would. I mean, they fish all along it. So if it was desirable looking, I bet they'd get in there and use it for swimming more.
I said, you can know with power, we probably have to run it, but probably.
We can check on it.
If I remember correctly, there is power to the west side of the parking lot. There's a power box over there because we just tied in for our Lake White Marina camera network. But I don't remember if power gets over to the beach, like where your question mark is. I don't know if there's power right there.
It won't be where we want to get it out.
Yeah, it would need to be run out, I think.
Okay. That's a bigger investment, but we could at least start looking into, how big the investment would be this year.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I'm saying. I meant say east side of the parking lot. That's as far as it goes.
The improvements done on Sandy Beach area too could start.
Yeah. They have to run some.
Yeah, if we get an open water.
If we can get that to work,
Then that'd be
and that's
another-
something that we want to test, right? And that's getting into this flexibility. Let's be nimble with this stuff, gather the data, do what we know we need to do, but have some flexibility so we can test some of these ideas to see if they work before we put a whole bunch of money into, longer term infrastructure investments and that kind of thing. So these are all good things to put on our list of, and this summer, I think we can start looking into how much money it would really be to get power out there, for instance. You can run these things on solar, makes it more expensive that way, but it's something we can compare to. Just, of course, solar batteries, unless you have a battery bank too, it's less. Yeah, so I'm about done, Scott, you're looking at done, yeah, okay, that's okay. So given this monitoring, so this year, instead of doing the replicate samples, because we couldn't really use the Boston kind of design anyway, we're proposing that we drop the shoreline samples. They weren't that different than the open water. That'll give us some additional monitoring dollars. We're also not worrying so much about replicates and instead worrying about trying to maintain this time series. And so what we're planning on now is working with whatever company we contract with, whoever the successful bidder is, would do the day before and the day after samples. And then we would work with our existing HAB monitoring program, that they would collect additional data wherever we're doing the treatments to cover us for the 4-day period. And then we're planning right now on weekly treatments being necessary. We might back that off depending on what the data is looking like. But if we're doing weekly treatments, and they'd be out there for the 7-day sample, which would also be the prior sample for the next year. So we'd be reducing the number of marinas that we're treating this year, but we'd be having information for the control sites and the treatment sites, and we have a continuous time series record for day before, day after, 4 days, 7 days, and that would exist throughout the entire summer, assuming we're doing weekly treatments. And I think that will help us get at a lot of these questions we had about the longevity of copper versus peroxide and that kind of thing. So that's one way. And then we're also planning on working with the June sucker recovery program to collect fish, to get copper fish tissue as a baseline. So we're getting this accumulation thing and what we might be concerned about there. As long as we're getting the fish tissue, we're trying to get the money to also do mercury, selenium, and also PCBs. It's not PCP. PCBs. And then we're also planning on doing copper sediment samples as well. And ultimately maybe some behavioral studies. And then we also plan on, this gets to the last thing I want to talk about before we jump, plan on funding a literature review to look at what's known about the treatments and the relative risk of treatments and the cost of treatments and the effectiveness of treatments as it reflects to both reducing cyanobacteria blooms and also as it reflects to potential harm for fish and other desirable wildlife. We think that's money well spent, and that would then be incorporated into what we hope to after we have, say, 4 years worth of data or whatever we feel is appropriate. What we'd do is have a firm do a lake-wide evaluation saying, okay, knowing what we know now and all these little experiments we've done and everything else, what's the long-term strategy for conducting these treatments on the lake? What treatments do we want to apply and where are they most effective? How does this look in conjunction with the work that Scott's doing and others with the Utah Lake Science Panel and Steering Committee? With the nutrient reductions that are occurring, are these treatments going to be part of that long-term strategy? If so, what does that look like specifically? So that if we're talking about expanding this beyond these marinas, it's expensive enough trying to do these little areas. Now we're talking, we're going to expand it to be lake-wide in certain areas, maybe where restorations are going on or whatever. And you're talking moving them tens of thousands of dollars and start adding zeros to that pretty quick. And so we think it makes sense to have a really thoughtful approach to how we're going to do this moving forward. It's going to be the long-term part of how we're managing the lake. And so that's proposing setting aside some of this money over this 5-year plan to do that towards the end of the 5 years. So we take all these data into consideration and make some recommendations in terms of long-term management strategies. Oh yeah, that was mine.
Is that the same line?
Oh, it's future stuff, future projects. I actually put that, I gotta be cheeky, but also because I wanted to point out that because of this long-term sort of valuation piece, this is probably something, no matter how we look at it, we're going to be dealing with for years to come. We need to realize because this is going to be part of our approach. It's a long-term thing, and that might Steve.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. We'll move on to Soren Simonson's presentation on the Leavenworth watershed. Just want to let everyone know that we can share all the presentations from today following the meeting. So if you have any questions, we'll have Jeff's contact information.
Do you have any thoughts about any of that? Number from planning or approach or anything? Please let me know.
Yep.
I've actually got a clicker right here for you. Just put the presentation on that desktop really quick, and so it won't work quite yet. Let me just
I'll just give a little bit of introduction background. I know many of you, but not everyone. I'm kind of Eric's counterpart with a peer organization called the Jordan River Commission. We were organized in 2010, which was about maybe 5 years or so after the Utah Lake Commission was organized. We're organized a little bit differently. The Utah Lake Commission was organized through the legislative process. We're organized by an interlocal agreement of all of the partner organizations that regulate or have some jurisdiction over different aspects of the Jordan River. And I'll give a little bit of background about our structure for those of you that are not familiar with it. Eric serves on our governing board, so we do have Utah Lake interests represented in the work that we do as a Jordan River Commission. Todd Munger represents Lehigh City on our similar technical committee to this one, and also attends many of our governing board meetings as well, representing the city council. So what I want to share with you today is an initiative that we launched a couple of years ago as we were kind of pivoting volunteer activities. We do a ton of work with volunteers around the Jordan River, everything from cleaning up litter to planting native vegetation and restoration conservation work to organizing events. Some of those are similar to things that the Utah Lake Commission is doing, but they're different on a river than they are on a lake. We have similar shoreline as Utah Lake. We have roughly 100 miles of shoreline, but it's a very narrow corridor as opposed to surrounding a massive body of water. So the issues that we deal with are very different. We're also at the bottom of the watershed, and so I know while you're looking at water quality issues in very important ways here, and we follow those things closely because the health of the river relies on its largest tributary, which is Utah Lake. But our issues are also, excuse me, different in many aspects because it's a very different kind of water system. Just a little bit of background if you're not that familiar with the Jordan River and Parkway. It's a 51-mile river. It flows from Utah Lake to the Great Salt Lake. It covers about a 3,800 square mile watershed area, which includes the watershed for Utah Lake as a tributary and the Provo River as well. There are 13 natural creek and stream tributaries to the Jordan River, in addition to Utah Lake. And then there's 4 water reclamation facilities that also discharge. So there's some man-made tributaries as well. And we deal with a lot of the similar things as you do here, nutrient loading and things like that. There's also many, many stormwater discharges. We've estimated probably in the range of several hundred of those along the entire Jordan River. Some of them are really large, like coming off of major highways and roadways. Some of them are very small, coming from parking lots and both public and private lands. A lot of different wildlife finds their home along the Jordan River, from bird species to large and small mammals, fish and amphibian and reptiles. And there's really abundant recreation. Most people are familiar with the Jordan River Trail, which is about a 46-mile trail. It doesn't go the entire length of the river. It ends at Center Street in North Salt Lake, which is where the Legacy Nature Preserve begins, which is about a 2,400 acre preserve that was created when the Legacy Parkway Freeway was built about 15 years ago. And that's where the Parkway Trail, so the river extends through that preserve, but the trail does not. It's a limited access preserve. There are lots of different jurisdictions that have regulation of the river. These include cities. There's currently 16 municipalities that the river either abuts or flows through. And cities have jurisdiction over land use and development around the river, stormwater, transportation, mobility systems, parks, trails, open space, public safety, and so forth. We have 3 counties, Utah, Salt Lake, and Davis counties. They also have a lot of jurisdiction, more in the form of public works, trails, weed management, watershed, flood control, those sorts of things. There are a number of special districts, water supply districts, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, mobility districts. And then there's state and federal. They often work closely together. They have different jurisdiction, but a lot of the federal jurisdiction is regulated through state agencies that are parallel. So everything from land management of public lands to water quality, water rights, air quality, transportation mobility, fish and wildlife protection, fire and public safety, and emergency management. Just a brief history of how we came to be. So in 2008, Salt Lake County led an effort with a consultant team spearheaded by Envision Utah to create a document that we call Blueprint Jordan River. And this came about because there are so many different jurisdictions that have been doing piecemeal work for many decades around the Jordan River. And there was really an opportunity as we started to see the trail emerging and things like that to bring together entities to help do more work together than we could do individually. And so we created this vision for the Blueprint Jordan River. And that resulted in a published document in 2008 that's been kind of our guiding document. Over the last several years, we've been updating that document. Back in 2018, as we were thinking about doing a strategic plan, we said, you know, there's a lot that's changed. This prolonged drought has had impacts, a lot of new development, especially around the point of the mountain with the prison relocation and things like that. The announcement of Rocky Mountain Power closing their plant on the Jordan River near North Temple in the State Fair Park. So we decided rather than just doing a strategic plan, let's update the blueprint, acknowledge some of the new opportunities and some of the new risks and challenges, and also go back to the public and get input from the public. That plan was just adopted by our governing board 2 weeks ago, and it includes these 7 categories: natural habitat systems, water in the river, comfort and inclusivity, recreation, safety, well-being, transportation and development, and communication, education, and the arts. The water in the river has become much more of a focus than it was previously. And that's because there's a lot more recreation happening in the river. It's also led us to see a lot of the challenges that the river faces, from low water levels to a lot of the stuff that ends up in the river through the stormwater system. Our commission is organized, probably not unlike yours. It was kind of modeled after the Utah Lake Commission. We currently have 16 cities and 2 counties. Utah County is not participating currently, although we've been having some positive conversations with the county commission about maybe coming back and joining this. We have several state agencies. This says 2. We actually just added UDOT during the recent legislative session. So we have 3 state agencies. And then we have a number of partner organizations, including the Utah Lake Commission, that support the work that we do. We've got a technical committee similar to yours and an event committee. I want to focus mainly now on an initiative we launched during COVID, when we were kind of, as I said, we were kind of rethinking volunteer because we weren't doing big group stuff. And there were a lot of people that were outside on the parkway. We saw here in Utah County in some trail counters in Saratoga Springs and Lehigh. There were areas that the trail usage increased by as much as 400% during those first few months of the pandemic. So a lot more people were using the parkway, both paddling and walking and biking and other things. And people started to notice that there were some things around the river that were concerned, along with litter and stuff like that. So we've also noticed just the health of the river. So this is taken about 3 years ago, paddling a very healthy river in Lehigh. It's roughly 100 to 150 feet wide and probably 20 to 30 feet deep. This is a photo that was taken just a couple of weeks ago during our Paddle the Jordan River series. We actually had to cancel the last 2 Saturday paddles because there's just not enough river. This was in Lehigh, and you can see there's barely a trickle of water, and we portaged through muddy riverbed for probably a mile or more in total, just because there's no water. This is what the river looks like in Bluffdale near the Point development, that the prison redevelopment. It's not much of a river. This was taken also about 2 or 3 years ago. So availability of water is a kind of a big deal. The other thing that we're really seeing is just the amount of litter and accumulation of debris in the river. This was taken just across the river from the State Fair Park. A friend of mine, Ray Wheeler, who's been an advocate, he lives near the river in Glendale. And this is, where kind of the big culprit for this is. So this is, I believe this is 2100 North in Lehigh. And you can see the proximity of storm drains to the river. And those storm drains often flow unfiltered to the river. So whatever's on the streets. Now, there have been some recent rule changes. And there are new requirements that have just come into place over the last couple of years that require different kind of treatment and pre-treatment and detention of water in areas that it's collected on paved surfaces, like parking lots and roadways and things like that. But there's a lot of system that exists where we don't have that possibility. And so we're starting to pay a lot more attention around what's happening in the storm system. And until we're able to invest in changing storm systems, which exist across a pretty broad area, the next best thing we can do is to get the public engaged in changing how we interact with our storm system and really paying attention to what ends up in the storm drains. This is where those outlets come. This is one by Thanksgiving Point. I think this one's at Pioneer Crossing. This is one up in Salt Lake County. This is what often looks like what comes out of the storm drains. You can see just the accumulation of litter and debris right at the end of the storm drain. This is like 400 south in Salt Lake. And of course, at the bottom of the watershed, it's much worse. We don't see so much litter and debris in the river here, but the further you go north along the river, the more that accumulates. And by the time you get to South Salt Lake and West Valley and Salt Lake and North Salt Lake, it's become quite challenging. So we've launched this initiative. We're doing First Friday campaigns, and the first Friday of every month, we encourage people to get out and take pictures and clean up their storm drains around their homes and businesses. Those are things everybody can do. We would love all of your support of promoting this through your cities, through organizations that you work with, whether they're community groups or church groups or schools or things like that. Help us get the word out. Mill Creek, which is our newest city along the Jordan River, has really embraced this. and they do a lot of promotion. We're trying to just spread the word so that other cities pick up on this. And, you know, this is what we're after, accumulating. You know, a lot of people think, well, it's, you know, leaves and grass. That's natural. That doesn't affect the river. But when you get these large quantities of organic matter, the organisms that decompose that take oxygen out of the river. And so we get real drops in oxygen levels after storm events. That becomes very, very detrimental to aquatic wildlife and produces those really awful smells, the methane and things like that, from decomposing matter. In the natural world, those would decompose where they fall, not accumulate on paved surfaces and get flushed down every time it rains or storms. This year, oh, go ahead.
The Springs did a program, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they put these, they're called Surflex Inlet, and there's some inlets and it catches all the leaking debris. And they were cleaned out locally. I wonder if that's something we can start implementing. Like, almost areas.
Probably so.
Because it wasn't very expensive. I used to work on it.
Yeah. Great idea. We love it. Anything we can do to remove both litter and all of that organic matter at the point where it originates, where the inlets are, is positive. Just this year, we've started a second Saturday service project, and we go to a different park or area, highway crossing or something around the Jordan River. And we get volunteers out cleaning up. This was one in a few months ago. We did one in Saratoga Springs back in February. We're down in Midvale in March. And it just blows people away how much litter and debris and stuff accumulates. So,
You measure how much it collects?
we measure the weight of the litter and debris and stuff that we collect. We don't do much beyond that, although we can probably do more. I was going to show this video. We had a 9/11 day of service last year. I think you did some stuff around Utah Lake. We kind of focused on this because we had thousands of volunteers and we couldn't manage all of those volunteers with our small staff of 3. So I won't play the video because we don't have time for it right now. You know, we're just doing a lot of social media engagement around this, and anything that you can do to help spread the word. We've got lots of ways to reach us. We love your watershed. Hashtag is what we're using just to share videos of cleaning up around your home and business, stuff like that. You can use First Friday or Second Saturday for events and activities that you're involved in. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments you have. I know time's probably short, so unless there's anything pressing, I'll turn it back over to staff. Thank you for letting me take a few minutes to talk about a way we can all get involved with more watershed healthy and clean.
Thank you very much, Sam. Sam, we could probably distribute that video.
Yes, be happy to send slides.
Yeah, it's on the PowerPoint, so if you want to share that, you can go watch it. It was created by a volunteer with the Just Serve group that was organizing the 9/11 day of service. And it kind of highlights some of these things, and the video can be shared very easily as well.
As we're transitioning, are there any questions tonight? Great.
Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. With that, we'll turn the time over to Eric, and he'll kind of step us through the short-term plan for transitioning from Utah Lake Commission to the Utah Lake.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So everyone here is probably interested, since the Lake Commission is, as a result of this recent legislation, will be dissolved over the next 7 or 8 months. So we're working both to continue the efforts of the Lake Commission while simultaneously setting up the Utah Lake Authority. There's a few deadlines that we're working with that kind of go through that process. We'll have our board seated by the end of June this year, or the beginning of June this year. And then we'll start the planning process for the general plan for the Utah Lake Authority over the next coming months. And that new board will also allow us to select some subcommittees that will help with that organization and planning of that new general plan. So we've got to be out of our Utah Lake Commission, shirts by May 1st of this coming year. All of the staff from the Lake Commission just transition over to the Utah Lake Authority. In the coming year, in July 1st, we'll be hiring a new full-timer that will help us with this transition. And then we're also working with the Assistant Attorney General's office, or the Attorney General's office. They'll assign us an attorney to help kind of create this new entity, as it's a state entity and it has more reporting and some just more requirements. So we have to figure out that element to it. And so we'll be working with that person to kind of design it the right way as well. Kind of some differences between the Lake Authority and the Lake Commission. The Lake Commission for the last number of years has operated on about a $350,000 a year budget. Everything that we do essentially on the lake is done so with grants. The Lake Authority and that budget comes from contributions from all of our members. Whereas the Lake Authority just receives a one-time or an ongoing appropriation from the state of $1.5 million per year. It does not have contributions from individual agencies or cities, but it will have input from a similar makeup, a 15 board makeup instead of a 23 that the Lake Commission has. So it's just been kind of tightened up a little bit so that we make sure that we have great participation. What else? As far as grants, one of the things that is challenging for the Lake Commission is that a lot of grants that are offered require a match of some portion or another. And when the budget that you have doesn't allow for matching that, it puts us in a position where we're trying to get this grant to match this grant, and we're crossing our fingers that they come together, because we might be ineligible for it if this one doesn't work out. And so it's just made it a lot more challenging. Whereas going forward with the Lake Authority, we will have an amount in our budget that can go directly towards matching of grants and really leveraging those dollars well. The other thing that we have struggled with in the past is that as an interlocal, we cannot receive directly any state funding. So all state funding has to go to a separate entity and then sort of quasi managed through the Lake Commission. So if we get a grant for marina upgrades, that grant will go through our partners, Forestry Fire and State Lands, and then we'll kind of work directly with them and kind of manage that in this loop. As the Lake Authority, any appropriations can come directly to the authority, and we can kind of manage those directly. And it just, more than anything, it kind of helps us speed that up a little bit so that we can get RFPs ready and out the door as soon as those funds become available. As far as projects are concerned, we have every intent to carry out all the projects that we've had planned and then some. So shoreline restoration work, we continue doing the Phragmites work that we've been doing, which has been very successful. This year we add a drone to the process. We talked about that a little bit last time, so that we can do better monitoring. Maybe a week out, we'll fly a drone to see what we're working on next. And then we can either treat that with a helicopter, we can treat it with the Marshmaster, or we can actually treat really isolated areas where we've got a lot of good native vegetation growing back in just little spots of Phragmites. We can treat those with a drone as well. And so that just improves our ability to be effective on that restoration work. Our Wakara Way project is moving through its planning and engineering phases. We continue to have meetings on that. I've told you before, we've got it all funded. You'd think that would be the biggest hurdle, but carrying it out and getting those funds on the ground can be challenging, especially when we're working around a lake, which is surrounded by wetlands. So it's a slow process, but we are making progress there. The Marina Enhancements, these are underway and being planned right now. We received grant funding for American Fork Boat Harbor, Saratoga Springs, South Marina, and North Marina, and the Linden Marina. So cool projects. These are master plan projects that we're doing phases of, and we're pursuing additional grants for those as well to really make those meaningful investments. Our wetland enhancements, what we're really trying to do is find our targeted, prime wetlands and not only enhance them, but find ways to bring those to life. So the Wakaraway project is a prime example of that, where we can create a trail system that borders that wetland area, and then we can demonstrate to people how the whole system works. So stormwater systems coming into those effectively so that they can be a benefit to the wetland, not a detriment to that. Can be examples that can be shown through that project. So it'll be fun to see that come to pass. As far as algae treatments, we've got a great presentation on that. So you guys are up to speed on the algae treatments for the coming year and for beyond. And then access enhancements. We submitted an application this year through the Habitat Council for 5 of our non-marina access points that are in desperate need of some improvements to the roads that lead to them. There's the one that you drive past if you're heading to Springville, right along the side of the freeway, the mill race access point. If you've driven down that, you know that it's a pretty brutal road. So this grant would improve those access points, improve the parking, some of the signage and fencing that has been in disrepair for some time. We'll find out shortly if, how much of that we receive. Lake level, probably get Russ to talk about a long time and tell us the latest predictions. I heard at his recent meeting that they've done. We're at 3.69 feet below full. According to the June 2nd meeting that I listened into, that is very likely to peak this year, where we are today. We'll have runoff, but I suspect that now that the agriculture and secondary water use has kicked on, any runoff that's coming down is just going to kind of hold us steady where we are today. And then as soon as runoff stops, we'll start to see drops. Hopefully not to this stage. This was 2016, 2 photos from 2016. I think that's Lincoln Marina. And to the left there, I joked with Sam that it didn't matter that this wasn't in the fall when the lake got to its shallowest, because a field was a field. This is Provo Bay on the left from Sweet Lane. So we're glad that we still have a pretty decent amount of water in the lake. Just wanted to, we talked about this briefly. Work is beginning. They're staging for the South Saratoga Springs Marina project. This is the new swim area, one new jetty to the north of their existing marina. They're getting the final pieces of their permit done, and then they can start their construction out into the lake. The camera network is it done?
I actually just got a text from Ryan.
We're very close. So
Linden and
the
American
plan was
Fork
have
finalized.
all 5 marinas have a camera system set up so that not only does it provide parking views, lake views, marina view, but it also provides a traffic counter camera at the front of each of those marinas so that we can get an accurate count for the first time in ever of visitation on the lake. So that'll be fun to have that data coming in that we can have access to, and the individual marina operators can do planning based on their visitation going forward after this.
We have the algae trackers and
Oh yeah, yeah.
So these will be live.
They're
So these
lively.
will be on our website as well as Lake Monsters, and then any cities
Cities.
can do so on their websites as well.
And the website itself, the Lake Monster website, is a useful website beyond just marinas. They have weather and other useful information for folks that are viewing them.
So they could potentially integrate that data fairly easily.
yeah.
So at least by the end of this month, it'll all be live and everybody can see that. So, this is the North Saratoga Springs Marina, just a rendition or a rendering of that. We're pursuing funding for it. We've received at least 2 grants for that already. It's a big project. It's about a $9 million project, and we're only about $1 million or so into that. But really exciting to have yet a new marina on the lake at the north end of the valley, so that traffic coming from the north has easy access to the lake.
Is that on the block of the property?
Correct. Yeah. That was deeded to the city as part of a larger D.R. Horton development. D.R. Horton purchased that property, another property that belonged to Scotland Property. This is also, just so you know, one of the proposed sites for the proposed nature center on Utah Lake. Not from Hutchins Museum. This is a big nature center for Utah Lake with a laboratory space so that we have multi-agencies that can utilize this spot. One of the priorities was that it would be on a marina, so that folks that want to bring samples from the lake to the lab have easy access. And so there's not a lot of options.
If the bubble curtains prove effective, then you need to be planning those in these plans.
Oh, yeah.
Improvements also.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, as you already know, sorry, this is Sarah, you with Saratoga. So because the property right next to this is forestry, fire and state lands just to the east of this. And they mentioned that you've been talking with them about possibly coordinating that and having maybe the parking on the city property, but maybe a possible structure on theirs.
Yeah, it's quite a prime location. You've got that band of trees to the east side of this project.
Yeah.
Right. They're really old. They were part of the old resort that was here on this property. And so if you were to put the nature center back in this corner, you would have all these wetlands that belong to forestry, and then wetlands over to the right here. You know where that was on the map. Yeah, yeah. There's a number of cool areas though, so we'll see how that pans out.
Great.
Sandy Beach is well underway. Most of the improvements that they're planning are done now. They've improved the road. They're adding restrooms. They've added a guardrail. There will be some picnic pavilions that have not been installed yet, but those will be in shortly. Here's kind of the panning view of that. But it really is kind of cool. It creates this side loop next to the main road into there so that people can kind of get off the main road and not be worried about kids running around on that main road coming in. Gives them a loop with a number of picnic sites with the shade of trees in the summertime. It's really pretty down there.
And a restroom.
Yes.
I'm excited about that one down there.
The life jacket loaner program is underway. Finally, this took a lot of effort. Sam's done a ton of work on this. We got our designs. We found a handyman to come and do the installation of these. We have at least the nulls in.
So all 5 stations he's doing right now are partially complete. I actually have some slides that if you want me to.
Oh yeah,
further. I can include about pictures.
But we've got life jackets for it. We're doing a couple fundraisers that Sam will talk about. This is an exciting one to have these life jacket loaning stations around the lake at our biggest access points. So people show up, they don't have a life jacket, they can grab one off the stand so that they don't risk their life by getting in the water without one. These are those access points that I talked about earlier for the Habitat Enhancement project. I'll call it there.
You want me to just jump in then, Scott?
Yeah. Please, and then got any questions for the two of that.
So as Eric, I'll start with the life jacket program because Eric was talking about that. Originally, we plan on having 7 total. There's one existing one at Saratoga Springs. We're holding on that one to build a second one until they finish up their plans a little bit further with their jetty and their new beach coming in. But the other locations are all listed there. All of those have been partially built. I have a photo on the next slide. The signs are actually being picked up today for installing at the various locations. This is what the signs are going to look like. So we wanted to focus this not just on educational information about life jackets to make sure people are being safe, but also additional info. So we have information about checking the weather conditions. There's the non-emergency and emergency phone numbers listed as well. And then those QR codes in the bottom right corner are 3 different purposes. One takes them to the state parks website with lots of great information on life jackets. Another one takes them to our life jacket loaner program page that has the map showing where all the stations are at, the ability to donate if they want to do so, et cetera. And then the third QR code actually takes them to the Windy Lookout app, which is, if you haven't heard of that app yet, we've talked about it in the past at these meetings. It was developed by a Utah Lake sailor who has a background in app development, and it notifies as much as 30 to 45 minutes in advance of wind events at Utah Lake. So using the stations that we've had put in, as well as others that are in the area, it helps notify people so that they can be safe. These are some of the photos of the stations in various stages of completion. The far left is at the Knolls, the middle is at Linden Marina, and the right is at Lincoln Beach. So he's been finalizing the install here within the next week and getting those signs mounted on them, and then we will be shortly after putting them up. The timing is fortuitous because May is Water Safety Awareness Month. So the commission has planned a social media campaign, some blog posts, a podcast episode, all to go along with water safety. And we're also going to have 2 fundraiser events that actually started with other groups that came to us and wanted to support this program. The first being the Paddle with Care fundraiser, and the second being the photo exhibit. I'm going to switch to the next slide because I do speak about them both here. The Paddle with Care event is the flyer you see on the screen. This is a group of kayakers that came to us and said, we really want to do something to, do a fundraiser event for the program, and, a memorial paddle, if you will, to remember those who unfortunately did lose their lives. And so they're going to be paddling from Vineyard Beach over to American Fork Marina. It's about a 2.5 mile paddle. And we've got a great group of volunteers from Utah County Search and Rescue and others that are going to be out there monitoring and making sure that's a good paddle. And then at AF Marina itself, there will be kind of a celebration, if you will. There'll be some educational booths there. There'll be some activities that people who are there, either paddlers or family and friends that are waiting for the paddlers to arrive, can all participate in. So it'll be a great opportunity. Even if people don't want to paddle, they can come down there and learn about water safety, learn a little bit more about the lake and such. So that'll be on May 7th. And then the other fundraiser is with the Utah Lake Photo Club. They've been a great partner for us in the past. The commission's long supported that club and it sponsored them and helped to do a variety of things. And now they wanted to return the favor, if you will, wanted to help in fundraising for this. So the status on this right now is photographers donated their photos to be considered. They're now being voted on. It's on our website. There's a link to the voting, and anybody can go pick which one is their favorite. And the top 30 will be selected from that, and those will be available for purchase. And about half of them we will actually print and put on display at the Sarah Center for the Arts in Orem. And that'll be up for the entire month of May. So anybody can go in person and purchase one of the ones that's on display, or there'll be the ability to order them online through Alan's camera, who is handling all the printing for us. And 50% of those proceeds are going to go directly to the Life Jacket Loaner program to help with ongoing operating costs, building more stations, and purchasing more life jackets. So these are some of the upcoming events. It's just the last thing I want to share. Obviously, our photo contest is open and running for the lake. We keep that open all year until September. May 7th is the paddle event. The photo fundraiser is in the month of May. And then in June and July, we have some upcoming additional events. The annual scavenger hunt will run from June 3rd through the 12th. That's the one that we do on the Goose Chase app, where there's over 150 different missions you can choose from, everywhere from watching the Utah Lake Legacy documentary online to how many people can you fit on one paddleboard out on the water. Just a fun and educational way for people to spend some time learning about the lake. And then we are in talks right now with DWR of offering a summer version of our Winter Fish Fest that I spoke at one of our recent meetings about, in order to kind of target different species and also different angler interests. But we haven't settled on a date quite yet, but we'll have more news about that coming soon. I do have a few physical flyers for both the photo fundraiser and the paddle event. If anybody wants to take one, we always appreciate any help in having people attend and raising awareness about these outreach events. They're a great tool for people to have fun, learn more about the lake, and have a good experience there, and hence be able to continue to utilize it as a resource and support all the efforts that all of you and the commission and others are doing to try and protect it and enhance it. That is what I have. I don't know if anybody has any questions for Eric or I on those.
Questions for Eric and Sam? Okay. Excellent. Any general questions from the committee or others in the public? All right. Let's see. Next meeting scheduled for June 15th, and we're planning to have these meetings as needed. You'll notice that we've canceled several in the past, and so we just wait to have some content to share with you. So if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, please let us know. After that, we're looking, kind of that meeting schedule, August 17th, October 19th, and December 7th. So again, just as needed with any content that we have. Okay, without any additional discussion, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. We're adjourned. Thank you.